When I say medical cannabis, what type of reaction does that elicit from all of you? I think there's, yeah, I get that a lot. So, you know, when you think about that and we look at what the country's going through today, there's a lot of different reactions, but there's two distinctly different industries. One is the recreational space, okay, which is really focused on branding and marketing and you know, this euphoric lifestyle. And the other is the medical side, which its primary focus is on research and development and efficacy of new products that can help people. In the United States, I mean, you can see from the map, even on November 8th of this year, another 8 states went and voted. The voters actually brought it into effect, a lot of them being recreational. So one of the primary issues right now that we see is that people are trying to integrate cannabinoids into their medical treatment plans, right? And there's not really good support mechanisms today. So when you think about what these families have to go through, and some have, you know, severe treatment regimens, if you're going to a doctor, or in New York, if you can even find a doctor that's willing to write you a prescription, generally they don't have a good comfort level with the entire treatment, okay? So we can get a recommendation, now we have to go get the product, right? If you go to a dispensary in New York, let's say you get your first prescription, you go for a refill. Right now, the consistency or the lack of consistency in the product and the differences in dosage every time you go to get a refill is completely different. So you're left, if you go to a dispensary and they don't have your medication, you're left in a situation where you're either going to have to try to work with whatever they have and make that work. You don't have medicine, or you've got to go to one of the other 19 dispensaries in New York and try to find your product, which in some cases 3-4 hour drive, which is, you know, not okay. Luckily, in New York, there's a couple different organizations, nonprofits, that have been set up to kind of try to help families alleviate those issues. MCCONY's one in Buffalo that I personally have some relationship with. I really like them. In fact, Dan, one of the founders, is Dan right here. And I'm going to tell you a little story about his son here in a minute. But they had to go through this. This is Dan and Lisa. They had to go through this entire process because their own children are severely disabled, and they had no support. Now, Dan's a hospital pharmacist, so he was able to navigate the process fairly well. And at the end, he was completely exhausted and realized that a family that doesn't have that expertise is never going to figure this out on their own. So I'm going to tell you about his son, CADEN. He's got the pin on. So CADEN was born on Valentine's Day in 2007. And a day that really should have been one of the happiest of a young family's life was flipped on its head when his blood levels were off. So they immediately transferred him from the suburban hospital in which he was born to the intensive care unit at the Women and Children's Hospital in Buffalo. Dan knew what was going on, but still, and when it's your own child, it's got to be quite emotional. They did a bunch of tests, couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, sent him home. 3 days later, they noticed twitching, and they didn't know what it was. It turned out to be seizures, and really thus began CADEN's life and his journey in pharmaceuticals. Parents? Who's parents? Anyone's a parent here? Okay. I have 2 little daughters, 4 and 6. This is the medication that they prepare for CADEN every morning. 45 minutes to prepare medication every single morning that he puts in. Now, some of these are so intense that actually 11 of those medications are to combat the side effects of the other ones, right? That's really, I mean, it's really terrible. So, So if this seems really difficult. This seems like a really hard thing to do. And even after all of this, CADEN's conditions continued to decline, unfortunately. He spent a lot of time going to hospitals, totally intubated, in a constant state of seizure. So I would say that anybody that had this in their family, that's really difficult, right? This is Taylor. Taylor's CADEN's older sister. She's 7 years older. She suffers from a similar condition, and she's also not having any luck with her seizure medication. And those are the medications that she takes every day. So that 45 minutes, make that an hour and a half every single day. This is a picture of the 2 of them before. In 2012, CADEN was put on an end-of-life program similar to hospice. Okay? Dan was able to convince the doctors that were providing the treatment to try an experimental drug. It was a temporary solution. It worked. It bought him some time, but then Dan spent 5 years trying to find an alternative. And all the research that he was doing, and again, he's really highly qualified to do this, he kept coming back to cannabis. But he lived in New York, so he couldn't try it. Otherwise, he'd be a criminal. And because he's a pharmacist, he probably would have lost his license as well. So this is before, okay? Now they're both on a treatment, a 1-to-2 ratio of THC to CBD. It's completely non-psychoactive. We're not getting the kids high. There's no euphoric effect. This is them now, okay? Or just after. That's their treatment in the middle. So not only is the quality of life increased, which you can clearly see, and you have to ask Dan, I don't think they ever really saw CADEN smile before being able to find this effective solution, right? So not only is this good effects, quality of life issues, he lost 10 pounds of water weight, and he lost 1/4 of an inch around his ankles, which is, I mean, that's for a child, that's pretty impressive. He's also off of the 6 physical devices that he was on. So no more chest vests, no more nasal suctioning, which was very aggressive. He was oxygen dependent, so he's off oxygen. Catheters, and there was a few others that I'm missing. So some of the great alternative effects to this was he went from those 28 medications we saw earlier to down to 14, which is great, right? I mean, that's staggering. He also, the family is saving $10,000 a month. Better, they're saving the insurance company almost 10 times that amount, which is really, really impressive, and why insurance companies should probably get behind this. That's another talk. They're also, now that there's no physical devices, their living room in their house looked like a hospital. But now that they don't have all those physical devices, they're saving about 1,000 kilowatt hours per month on their utility bills. So kind of just another, interesting fact. So our barriers, especially in New York, is education, right? So parents, families, they can go to an organization like MCCONY and receive a lot of support. They can receive education. They can receive somebody that is actually willing to go through and help them navigate this process. When you're talking about those 28 medications, you're talking about some interesting issues with interactions, which I'll talk about in a second. But the biggest issue is educating doctors. Because if we don't get the physicians on board, which here in New York, if anybody's following the program, we've got over 10,500 patients active, but there's like 700 doctors that have enrolled in the program. And it's not really their fault. It's because we know anecdotally they have no real knowledge or education base for this medicine and how it's going to work, right? So they don't want to take on any liabilities. This education's really got to be putting this product in the same tranche as regular pharmaceuticals. It's got to fit the same profile. The doctors have to see this as any other drug that's coming into them that they can certify to their patients. And that includes standards. We have to have standards, whether it's a state standard or federal standards, we have to have standards for quality and consistency, and really so that every single time you go to the dispensary, you're getting the same quality of medication. Because when it changes, and you can ask Dan, even by a little bit, the reaction in the patient changes substantially. So whether it's the cannabinoid profile in the medication, it's not just about THC and CBD, it's about the full cannabinoid profile. And as long as we can have standards that will allow the patients and the doctors to oversee the same consistency, we'll have success in the program. The one thing I didn't mention was the withdrawals, okay? So Dan knowing, and this is another piece that goes really to education, Dan being a pharmacist knows that drug interactions are a really big deal. Now, when you have a lot of medications like that, there's clearly going to be a lot of oversight on the interactions. Now, when you bring cannabis into it, cannabis itself doesn't have any side effects, or none that are really of note. But Dan, knowing, and we wouldn't know this, but his child was on, for example, one of the drugs was Onv, which is a very aggressive drug. And Onv and cannabis both fight for some of the same receptors in the liver. So by doing so without weaning off of Onv first, it could have had some severe complications in an immune system or in a system that was already quite compromised. So how are we going to fix all this? Well, research and development, and really doing great programs to advance research and put it into those same efficacy, and by publishing work that shows just like they do on any other pharmaceutical. So right now we have a great partnership with the University of Buffalo. Actually, Dr. Lombardo's actually here. Our company and the Center for Discovery. And this is one of my favorite projects that we're working on right now. The Center for Discovery, if anybody is not aware of what that is, it's one of the most incredible places I've ever been. It's an amazing place with amazing people doing amazing things for severely disabled children and adults. A lot of their patients are on the autism spectrum disorder, and a huge subset of their population suffers from seizures of all different types. And one that I had never heard of, drop seizures, for example, can just happen as you're walking down the hall and you hit the floor. So you could imagine the other medical conditions that come along with that. Well, there's a little slide about the Center for Discovery. So we have put together a project with them where we're going to try to take their antiquated system for monitoring seizure activity, which today is, they write it on a piece of paper, and they try to maintain the records that way, but that's what they have. So our first phase of our project is going to make it a digital data capture system where we can also monitor things in real time. So we can actually monitor if they're going into seizure instead of having to look at it retroactively. And then maybe they can make some changes during the seizure to either help the patient make them more comfortable. What I didn't realize was that there is things that are completely random that I would have never thought of having not gone there, but a change in barometric pressure can actually send part of the hospital into seizures. And it's something that little. It's really amazing. Light, audio, just some of the most bizarre things. So another big piece of this is something they've always wanted was to have new data fields, new ways of collecting information that we can correlate back to when activities or events occur. The second phase of the project is going to be to introduce cannabinoids into the treatment regimen. Now, the focus there is really going to be tailoring that to each individual specific patient. And by doing this is really a collective system called comprehensive medication management, which is essentially providing better care at a reduced cost. Okay? That's a long definition for that. So one of the keys to a comprehensive medication management program, and something that we're working on in other places, is connections. So it's connecting the pieces between the patient and the doctor and the registered organization or the dispensing organization, and in our case, a patient safety organization, which is something that really nobody else in this field is looking at. Now, University of Buffalo has been certified as a federal PSO for about 6 years. They're at the forefront of all patient safety advocacy and programs like this. This is a very complex slide to just tell you that we're all working together. This is actually for one of the other projects where we're actually trying to integrate some of those support mechanisms for the families by using a group like MCCONY to give them some of that support outside of the internal workings of the system. And there's a lot of other things in there that we're doing, like smart card technology and everything else. So what is the actual focus of a CMM? It's so that we can monitor more distinctly the patient's conditions, how they're responding to medications. It's getting an actual patient-reported outcome, which is their account of how they're feeling during a reaction to something. It's doing blood assay development, which is if we see a positive therapeutic result when we're administering a medication, we take blood samples immediately, right then, so that we can actually baseline their blood concentration levels and see what actually caused the reaction. By doing that, we come up with, as we do more and more and more patients, we end up with bigger and bigger data sets. So as we're looking at each patient, we're monitoring and we're measuring their genetic profile, their reactions, their conditions. And so as we get bigger data sets, we're actually able to make correlations. Correlations that can then lead to faster recommendations for medications and hopefully better and faster results. Now, you can ask any of the doctors at the hospitals, you can ask Dan, who's had to do this on his own, if you can reduce it even by one seizure, you can actually change the quality of life for that person forever, right? Every seizure is killing the brain, right? It's a very, very negative thing. So the other project that we have that we're working on is something I like to call TIC. My team hates it because if you live in the Northeast, TIC's like a dirty word, right? So, and it's really just a fully integrated CMM program into a treatment center. So the idea here is that we can combine all these things under one roof. I really want to move away from the traditional dispensary model where you go in, you pick up your medication, and you go out, because that doesn't allow the communication between the patient and the doctor and the pharmacist at all. There is no oversight in that program today. So by doing this, not only can we improve the quality of care for the patient, but we're integrating our products, our cannabinoids, again, into that mainstream idea of having it part of an overall treatment regimen. Is that the last one? Oh, that was the last one. I must have deleted the last slide. So by doing this, I think all our goal is here is to get to individualized medicine, which I think should be the goal of all pharmaceuticals and all medicine, is because, your treatment or needs and your treatment and needs and my treatment and needs are completely different, right? We all react differently to the same medication. So just because we have the same condition doesn't mean that genetically we're going to respond to those the same way. So in closing, I asked you the question when I first stood up here, what do you think of medical cannabis when I say the word out loud? And I hope that I've at least opened your mind into thinking differently about this and how we can better service patients that really need this medication. So thank you very much.